After watching Game of Thrones and a couple of other historical TV shows, most people form a pretty clear opinion about the Middle Ages. Dirty, dumb, smelly, and powerless peasants toil away 365 days a year for some drunk and rowdy lord dressed in ridiculous clothes, living in a castle that doesn't even have a toilet. All of this is under the total control of the church, which is chopping off heads left and right and burning everyone at the stake. And if you happen to fall ill, a doctor will come and offer nothing more than bloodletting and a prayer for your health. Familiar picture, isn't it? Well, here's the thing. All of this is nonsense to varying degrees. The Middle Ages are surrounded by more myths than probably any other period in history. And in the next couple of minutes, we're going to talk about some of them. Let's start by debunking the biggest myth. The Middle Ages were not some obvious historical period during which life was uniquely different. In educational materials, everything seems simple and clear. They conveniently marked the beginning of the Middle Ages with the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 and ended with the fall of Byzantium in 1453. After that, they usher in the Renaissance, which supposedly changed the world with humanism and industrial revolutions. In reality, things are much more complicated. The Middle Ages are a purely conventional term, the boundaries of which vary from country to country. In England, for example, the era is often said to have ended with the discovery of America in 1492. In Spain, it's marked by the conquest of Granada. Outside of Europe, the borders are even more blurred, and distinctions are mostly arbitrary. The very notion of the Dark Ages, associated with the collapse of science, hygiene, and culture after the fall of Rome, is a complete myth. It originated with Francesco Petrarch, the father of the Renaissance. Francesco and his followers needed to make their teachings look favorable, so they painted their predecessors in a negative light. Petrarch described the period from the 6th to the 12th century as one of total regression and the loss of all Roman achievements. Over the centuries, Francesco was quoted thousands of times, and this narrative deeply embedded itself in people's minds, that of a dark, grim Middle Ages lacking hygiene and scientific progress. As is so often the case, reality was completely different. Let's take education, for example. The oldest still functioning universities in Europe are located in Bologna and Oxford. The former was founded in 1088 and the latter in 1096. A little later, Cambridge and Salamanca were added to the list. Smaller schools were built in large numbers, and there were plenty of inventions. During those so-called Dark Ages, for example, paper was introduced to Europe. It happened in 752 during the Battle of Talas, where two Asian superpowers, the Arab Caliphate and China, clashed. The battle took place on the border of what is now Kazakhstan and Kyrgyzstan. Due to betrayal, the Chinese lost, many soldiers were captured, and along with them, the Arabs gained access to the technology of papermaking. By 793, the first paper mill had already been built in Baghdad. Through connections with partially Muslim Spain, the technology spread to Europe, where it was improved, ultimately leading to the invention of the printing press, which changed the world. And all this happened during the Dark Ages, when supposedly there was no progress. Other inventions from this period include the astrolabe, which revolutionized astronomy, compasses, mechanical clocks, gunpowder, eyeglasses, and dozens of other innovations that appeared in Europe precisely during the era considered its darkest. What's more, the Renaissance didn't actually begin in the 15th century. There were several such renaissances throughout history. The reign of Charlemagne in the 8th to 9th centuries is known as the Carolingian Renaissance. Monasteries across Western Europe opened schools and libraries. A new genre of poetry emerged, along with a unified system of musical notation, later used by legendary composers. Most modern historians agree that the term Dark Ages is outdated and even insulting to our ancestors. Let's look at the simplest of people, the peasants. They are often portrayed as uneducated, unhygienic, and powerless, believing the earth was flat. But this is only partially true. Historical evidence shows peasants were aware of the world beyond their fields. For example, in 1086, William the Conqueror conducted the Doomsday Survey, recording data not only about landholdings, but also laws. Over time, there were multiple peasant uprisings due to violations of these laws, showing they were aware of their rights. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381, led by Wat Tyler, presented clearly articulated demands to reduce taxes and end serfdom. Court records show peasants often defended their interests legally, and chronicles describe sophisticated farming methods, evidence of practical knowledge in biology and agriculture. They weren't primitive. In fact, many of them even traveled. And it wasn't just about peasants. Travel in the Middle Ages was quite common. While it's now widely believed that people were born, lived, and died in the same village due to lack of transportation, in reality, various forms of travel were widespread. One of the clearest examples is the Camino de Santiago. In the Spanish city of Santiago de Compostela lie the relics of the Apostle James. Knights, peasants, merchants, and people of all social classes loved making pilgrimages there. Some sought forgiveness for sins, others hoped for healing, and some prayed for a good harvest. Regardless of the reason, people came from all over medieval Europe. There were walking routes from France, Italy, and even England. To this day, travel agencies offer modern pilgrims the chance to walk these paths. It's important to realize that there were plenty of other sacred destinations too. Rome, Jerusalem, and many local sites with lesser-known saints' relics were all part of countless pilgrimage routes. And these pilgrims weren't only the wealthy. Many were among the poorest. It wouldn't be wrong to say that such journeys were the medieval equivalent of today's tour packages, just with a bit less comfort in terms of transportation. Another common stereotype about the Middle Ages is that women were universally oppressed. It's easy to understand why this view is popular today. But in reality, despite the overarching patriarchy, there's a wealth of evidence showing that women could, and did, gain power when they wanted to. For example, in much of Europe, a widow could legally continue her husband's business after his death. In England, women were legally allowed to practice any profession. In fact, in 1363, a special decree was issued in London stating that a man could only pursue one trade, while a woman was allowed to try as many as she wished. Surprisingly, during the 10th to 13th centuries, the overwhelming majority of brewers were women. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. In Paris and the colonies, official silk guilds were composed entirely of women, not a single man among them. France, in particular, was ahead of its time. In what may seem like the backward Middle Ages, there was an official feminine title for a knight, chivalrous. These women took part in crusades, organized jousting tournaments, and were even accepted into military orders. The famous Joan of Arc was not an exception, but rather one of many female warriors. In addition to her, Jeanne of Flanders is well known. She effectively commanded an army during the War of the Breton Succession. In the French town of Belleville-sur-Vie, a square is named after another woman, Jeanne de Belleville, considered the first female pirate in Europe. And in 1337, Agnes Randolph, known as Black Agnes, defended Dunbar Castle for 6 months against an English siege. There are many such examples. And although women were limited in their rights, they clearly had room to maneuver. In fact, from a purely legal standpoint, women lost more rights in the 17th to 19th centuries compared to the period following the fall of Rome. Still, this isn't as contradictory as the case with the Mongols. Mongol invasions are often associated with destruction and decline in the parts of Europe they reached. But in reality, it's more complex. Of course, there's no justification for the destruction of cities and the killing of civilians. But the unfortunate truth is that such actions were common practice among Europeans of that era too. Professor Jack Weatherford has written an entire book detailing how the Mongols actually contributed to Europe's development. He points out that nomadic Mongols introduced a postal system to Europe. They were also the first to implement a merit-based system, promoting leaders based on skill, not birthright. Moreover, the Mongols helped popularize paper currency. Kublai Khan wisely adopted this system from conquered China. European merchants working with the Mongols experienced its convenience and gradually adopted it themselves. So once again, history proves to be far less black and white In this context, we'd also like to mention medieval medicine. The toolkit available to medieval doctors was certainly limited, but portraying them merely as bloodletters who could only pray would be inaccurate. Covering the entire topic would be impossible. So let's focus on just one example. In 1215, the Church officially recognized surgery as a distinct branch of medicine, assigning it to barbers. One of the most outstanding figures was Ambrose Pare, who still in the medieval era began using prosthetics, treated gunshot wounds with surprising effectiveness, performed cleft lip surgeries, and was the first to widely adopt amputation. This unpleasant but life-saving method is still in use today, and it came to us straight from the so-called Dark Ages, as did many bandaging techniques and forms of herbal medicine. Using plants, medieval healers managed to manage smallpox and even attempted to treat the plague. Later, these same herbs would serve as the basis for the synthesis of familiar modern drugs. For example, aspirin was derived from willow bark, a regular ingredient in medieval medicinal brews. There are also many grounded myths, like the absence of hygiene, clean water, or public baths. We discussed these in the first part of the video, and won't revisit the cliché of the unwashed queens. That was more of an exception. If you enjoyed this talk, feel free to like the video and leave your comments.